job posting had seemed almost too good to be true. Decent pay, free housing, and the chance to spend a winter season surrounded by snow-capped peaks in the Colorado Rockies. Marcus Chen had been searching for something, anything, to escape the suffocating monotony of his life back in Denver. His apartment lease was up. His relationship had imploded spectacularly 3 months prior, and his soul-crushing office job had finally driven him to the edge of sanity when he saw the listing for winter staff at the Coldwater Peak Ski Resort. He applied immediately. 2 days later, he received a call offering him a position in resort maintenance. The drive up to Coldwater Peak took nearly 5 hours, winding through increasingly remote mountain roads as civilization fell away behind him. The last town he passed through was a tiny place called Pinewood, barely more than a gas station, and a handful of weathered buildings clinging to the mountainside. From there, it was another 40 minutes of serpentine roads before the resort finally came into view. The main lodge was an impressive structure of timber and stone, sprawling across a cleared plateau with the ski slopes rising dramatically behind it. Even in the fading afternoon light, Marcus could see the network of lifts and runs carved into the mountain face. It looked picturesque, almost like something from a postcard. He parked in the employee lot and made his way to the main office, his breath misting in the cold November air. The season had not officially started yet, but a skeleton crew was already on site preparing for opening day in 2 weeks. Inside, the lodge was warm and smelled of pine and wood smoke. A woman in her mid-50s, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, looked up from behind the front desk as he entered. Her name was Helen Morivuk, and she was the resort manager. She greeted Marcus with a firm handshake and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. There was something appraising in her gaze, as if she were measuring him for some purpose he could not quite understand. She handed him a thick packet of paperwork and a key card for his room in the staff quarters, a separate building located about 200 yards from the main lodge. As she went through the standard orientation information, schedules and responsibilities, and emergency procedures, Marcus noticed a laminated sheet of paper sitting on the desk between them. It was titled Rules for Maintenance Staff, and it was covered in dense text. Helen caught him looking at it, and her expression grew serious. She slid the sheet across the desk toward him. "These are not suggestions," she said. Her voice had taken on a harder edge. "Every single person who works here is required to follow these rules exactly. No exceptions, no excuses. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded, picking up the sheet to read it more carefully. Some of the rules seemed standard enough. Always carry a radio and keep it on channel 3. Report any equipment malfunctions immediately. Never work alone in the equipment sheds after dark. But others were strange, specific in ways that made his skin prickle with unease. If you hear the lift motors running after the slopes close at 9 p.m., do not investigate. Return to the staff quarters immediately and lock your door. Do not look out the windows. If you encounter anyone on the slopes after closing, do not approach them and do not speak to them. Return to the main lodge by the interior route only. If you find tracks in the snow that do not match any known ski or snowboard pattern, mark the area with orange flags and report it to management. Do not follow the tracks. The northwest storage shed is off limits after sunset. If you need supplies from that location, retrieve them before 6 p.m. If you hear sounds coming from the shed after dark, ignore them. If the old double chair lift on the south face begins operating on its own, stay indoors until it stops. This may take several hours. Do not attempt to shut it down manually. There were more, nearly 20 rules in total, each stranger than the last. Marcus looked up at Helen, trying to read her expression. Is this some kind of hazing thing for new employees? He asked, attempting a laugh that came out strained. Helen did not smile. No hazing. These rules exist for your safety. People have been hurt here, Marcus. People have died. If you follow the rules, you will be fine. If you do not, I cannot help you. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. This is your only warning. Take it seriously or leave now. We will not hold it against you. For a moment, Marcus considered walking away. There was something in Helen's demeanor, a gravity that suggested she absolutely believed what she was saying. But he thought about his empty apartment, his failed relationship, the crushing weight of his old life. He needed this. He needed to be somewhere different, even if that somewhere came with bizarre rules and dire warnings. How bad could it really be? He told Helen he understood and would follow every rule to the letter. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Your shift starts tomorrow at 7 a.m. Get settled in tonight and review those rules again before bed. Memorize them. She handed him a laminated copy to keep. You will want to have this with you at all times. The staff quarters were utilitarian but comfortable. Marcus had a small private room with a bed, a desk, a dresser, and a narrow window that looked out toward the slopes. There were about 15 other rooms in the building, though only 6 were currently occupied. He met a few of his fellow staff members that evening in the communal kitchen. There was Jamie, a cheerful guy in his 20s who worked as a lift operator. Sarah, a quiet woman around Marcus's age who handled food service. And Tom, an older man with a graying beard who had been working at Coldwater Peak for nearly 8 years. Over a simple dinner of pasta and sauce, Marcus asked about the rules. The others exchanged glances, and the easy conversation died away. Tom was the first to speak. You read them? Yeah, Marcus said. They are pretty weird. What's the deal? Is this place actually dangerous? Or is management just really paranoid? Both, Tom said shortly. He pushed his food around his plate. Look, the rules are there for a reason. Things happen here. Strange things. You will see for yourself soon enough. But trust me when I say you do not want to find out what happens when you break them." Jamie nodded in agreement. "I have been here 2 seasons. First year, I thought it was all bullshit, like an elaborate prank. Then one night, I was walking back from the lodge after my shift. It was maybe 9:30, and I heard the lifts running. I could see the chairs moving up the mountain, empty, just going round and round." He paused, his usual cheerfulness fading. "I started walking toward them. I do not know why, just curiosity, I guess. But Sarah here grabbed me and pulled me back, told me to get inside immediately." Sarah spoke up, her voice soft. "The next morning, we found tracks all over that area. Boot prints, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, and the spacing between them was off, like someone with legs twice as long as normal had been walking around down there." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You are all serious about this?" "Dead serious," Tom said. He met Marcus's eyes. "I have lost friends here, kid. Good people who thought they knew better than the rules, or who just got careless. One guy decided to check out the northwest shed after dark because he needed a specific tool. We found him the next morning. He looked down at his plate. He was not right anymore. Something had happened to him, something bad. He would not talk, would not eat, just stared at nothing. They had to take him away. As far as I know, he never recovered." The room fell silent. Marcus wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it all as elaborate storytelling meant to scare the new guy. But there was no humor in their faces, no hint that this was anything other than the absolute truth as they understood it. He thought about the laminated rules sheet in his pocket and decided he would be very, very careful. His first few days at the resort were uneventful. Marcus's job consisted mostly of basic maintenance tasks, checking the heating systems, clearing snow from walkways, helping to prepare the lodge for opening day. The work was physical and tiring, but he found it satisfying in a way his old desk job had never been. The mountain air was crisp and clean, and despite the ominous warnings, Coldwater Peak seemed like a beautiful, peaceful place during daylight hours. But at night, things changed. Marcus began to notice small details that set his nerves on edge. The way the staff quarters grew absolutely silent after 10 p.m., as if everyone was holding their breath. The fact that all the windows had thick curtains that everyone kept tightly closed after sunset. The manner in which his coworkers would glance nervously toward the slopes whenever they heard an unexpected sound. On his 4th night, Marcus woke at some dark hour to the sound of machinery. It was distant, but unmistakable, the low mechanical hum of the ski lift motors. He checked his phone. 2:47 a.m. The lifts should not be running. He got out of bed and moved toward his window, his hand reaching for the curtain. Then he remembered the rules. Do not look out the windows if you hear the lifts after hours. Do not investigate. His hand hovered over the fabric. It would be so easy to just peek, to see what was happening out there. Maybe it was just a malfunction. Maybe it was maintenance running a late night test. Maybe there was a perfectly rational explanation, but Tom's haunted expression flashed through his mind, and Sarah's quiet voice describing those wrong-shaped tracks in the snow. Marcus dropped his hand and backed away from the window. He climbed back into bed, pulled the blanket over his head, and tried to ignore the sound of the lifts running in the darkness, until eventually, mercifully, they stopped. The next morning, he asked Tom about it during their break. The older man simply nodded. "You heard them last night." "Yeah, it was hard not to. You look out the window." "No, good." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "You are learning. That is good. Keep following the rules and you will be fine." "But what is it?" Marcus pressed. "What is actually happening?" Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I do not know. None of us do, not really. We just know that bad things happen to people who do not follow the rules. Maybe it is something about the mountain itself. Maybe something happened here a long time ago. Helen knows more than she tells us. I am sure of that. But she does not share. She just enforces the rules. As opening day approached, more staff arrived, and the resort came to life. There were ski instructors, rental shop workers, food service employees, and additional maintenance crew. The atmosphere became livelier, more energetic, but Marcus noticed that all the new arrivals received the same speech from Helen, the same laminated rules sheet, the same deadly serious warning. And he noticed that the veteran employees, the ones who had been at Coldwater Peak for multiple seasons, all carried themselves with a certain wariness, a constant low-level vigilance that never quite faded. Opening day came with clear skies and fresh powder. The resort filled with guests, and for a while, everything seemed normal. Marcus spent his days dealing with the endless small emergencies that come with keeping a ski resort operational. Frozen pipes, malfunctioning heaters, guests locked out of their rooms. It was busy and demanding work, but satisfying. During daylight hours, with the slopes full of skiers and snowboarders, with music playing in the lodge and the smell of hot chocolate and grilled food wafting from the cafeteria, it was easy to forget the strangeness of the place, but the nights remained unsettling. Marcus continued to hear the lifts running after hours, though less frequently now that the resort was fully operational. Once, he heard footsteps on the roof of the staff quarters, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth for nearly an hour. He kept his curtains closed and his door locked and tried not to imagine what might be up there. The next morning, there were no tracks in the snow around the building, though there should have been if someone had actually been on the roof. He did not mention it to anyone. 3 weeks into the season, Marcus was assigned to work an evening shift. His job was to do a final check of all the buildings and equipment after the slopes closed at 9 p.m., making sure everything was secure and properly shut down. He would be working with Tom, which was a relief. The older man's steady presence was reassuring. They started their rounds at 9:15, moving methodically through the resort with flashlights and radios. Everything was quiet and seemed normal until they reached the rental shop. The door was standing open, which was wrong. It should have been locked an hour ago. Tom motioned for Marcus to stay back while he approached carefully. Inside, the lights were off, and the rows of ski equipment cast strange shadows in the beam of Tom's flashlight. Nothing appeared disturbed or stolen. The door had simply been unlocked and left open. Tom pulled out his radio and called it in to Helen. She instructed them to close and secure the door, then continue their rounds. As they were leaving, Marcus glanced back at the building. For just a moment, he thought he saw movement in one of the windows, a pale shape that might have been a face. Then it was gone. He told himself it was just a reflection, just his eyes playing tricks in the darkness. They continued their inspection. The lodge was secure. The equipment sheds were locked and quiet, though Marcus gave the northwest shed a wide berth as they passed. That particular building had an oppressive feeling to it. Even from a distance, the lights in the ski patrol station were on, which was normal. Someone was always on duty there in case of late emergencies. But when they checked in, the patrol room was empty. The radio was on. The computer was active, but there was no one there. Tom's expression grew grim. He tried the ski patrol radio, calling for whoever was on duty. After a moment, a crackling response came through. "Sorry, had to step out for a minute." "Everything okay?" Tom asked who he was talking to. The voice identified itself as Derek, one of the senior patrol members. But Tom's face had gone pale. He clicked off the radio and grabbed Marcus's arm. "We need to get back to the lodge." "Now, what's wrong?" Marcus asked, but Tom was already moving, walking fast back toward the main building. Marcus hurried to keep up. "Tom, what is it?" "Derek is not on duty tonight," Tom said quietly. "Derek is not even at the resort. He left yesterday for a week off. Whoever that was on the radio, it was not him." Marcus felt ice water flood his veins. They reached the lodge, and Tom immediately called Helen. She answered on the first ring, listened to Tom's terse explanation, and told them both to stay inside until morning. "Do not go back out," she said. "Not for any reason. I will handle this." They spent the night in one of the back offices, doors locked, taking turns trying to sleep. Through the walls, Marcus could hear sounds from elsewhere in the resort. Footsteps in empty corridors, doors opening and closing. Once he heard what might have been laughter, distant and strange, and not quite human. Tom sat in a chair by the door with a heavy flashlight in his hand, his jaw set, his eyes hard. Neither of them spoke about what they were hearing. Dawn came as a relief so profound that Marcus almost felt dizzy with it. As soon as there was enough light, they did another sweep of the resort. everything appeared normal. The ski patrol station was empty and locked. The rental shop was secure. There was no sign of any disturbance. But in the snow near the base of the slopes, Marcus saw something that made him stop cold. Tracks. Long, narrow footprints with an abnormal spacing between them, just like Sarah had described. They led from the tree line to the base of the main lift, circled the area several times, then headed back into the forest. Tom saw them too. He pulled out a bundle of orange flags from his pack and began marking the area, creating a wide perimeter around the tracks. Marcus helped, trying not to look too closely at the prints. There was something fundamentally wrong about them, something that his brain refused to fully process. When they finished, Tom radioed Helen and gave her the location. She acknowledged, but offered no explanation or comment. The incident was never discussed officially. Helen simply adjusted the schedule so that no one worked alone after dark, and she reminded everyone at the weekly staff meeting to review the rules and follow them precisely. Life at the resort continued. Guests came and went, oblivious to anything unusual. The skiing was excellent, the weather cooperated, and Coldwater Peak earned positive reviews online. But the staff knew better. They kept the rules, stayed alert, and did not talk about the strange things they noticed. Marcus settled into the rhythm of the place. He learned to recognize the particular quality of silence that meant something was wrong. He learned to trust his instincts when they told him to avoid a certain area or to hurry back indoors. He learned which of his coworkers had been at Coldwater Peak long enough to be truly reliable, and which were still green enough to be dangerous. And he learned to live with a constant low-grade fear that had become so familiar it was almost comforting in its predictability. In mid-January, a heavy snowstorm hit the region. The resort closed for 2 days as the storm raged, dropping nearly 4 feet of fresh snow and making travel impossible. The guests who were already on site were stuck, but they seemed to view it as an adventure, gathering in the lodge to drink and tell stories while the wind howled outside. The staff were less enthusiastic. Storms seemed to make whatever strangeness haunted Coldwater Peak more active. On the second night of the storm, Marcus was in the staff quarters when the power went out. The backup generators kicked in immediately, but they only powered essential systems. Most of the lights went dark, leaving the building in deep shadow. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and checked his radio. The power outage was resort-wide. Helen's voice came over the radio, instructing all staff to remain in their quarters until the main power was restored. Do not go outside. Do not investigate any unusual sounds. Stay in your rooms with your doors locked. Marcus locked his door and sat on his bed, flashlight in hand. Outside, the storm continued to hammer the mountain, but beneath the wind and the rattle of snow against glass, he began to hear other sounds. Someone was walking in the hallway outside his room. slow, deliberate steps moving from one end of the building to the other. He could hear doors being tried, knobs turning, hinges creaking as the walker tested each entrance. Marcus watched his own doorknob, his heart pounding. The knob turned slowly, clockwise, as far as it would go, then stopped. The lock held. After a moment, the footsteps moved on. He heard a scream from somewhere down the hall, cut off almost immediately. Then nothing. The footsteps continued their patrol for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Eventually, they faded away. Marcus waited, hardly breathing, until Helen's voice came over the radio, announcing that main power had been restored. Even then, he waited another 20 minutes before unlocking his door and stepping out into the hallway. Several other staff members emerged at the same time, all of them pale and shaken. They gathered in the communal area, comparing experiences in hushed voices. Everyone had heard the footsteps. Several had heard their doorknobs being tested, but no one would admit to having screamed. When they did a head count, everyone was accounted for. Tom suggested that perhaps one of the guests had somehow wandered over from the lodge, gotten confused in the dark, but no one really believed that. The next morning, Sarah did not show up for her shift. Her door was unlocked and her room was empty, but all her belongings were still there. Her coat was still hanging on the hook. Her boots were by the door. She had simply vanished. Helen reported her missing to the county sheriff, but with the roads still impassable from the storm, no official search could be mounted immediately. When the sheriff finally arrived 2 days later, they found no trace of Sarah anywhere on the resort property. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. The incident sent a wave of fear through the staff. Several employees quit immediately, packing up and leaving as soon as the roads were cleared. Helen hired replacements, but the new people did not last long. Some found the rules too bizarre and left during their first week. Others experienced something that scared them badly enough to flee without even collecting their final paycheck. The core group of veterans, the ones who had been at Coldwater Peak for years, simply tightened their routines and became even more vigilant. Marcus thought about leaving. He thought about it a lot, actually, late at night when he could not sleep because he was listening for footsteps or lift motors or any of the other sounds that meant danger. But something kept him there. Partly it was stubbornness, a refusal to be driven away by something he did not understand. Partly it was the strange bonds he had formed with the other survivors, the camaraderie of people facing something terrible together. And partly, though he hated to admit it, it was a dark fascination with the mystery of the place. What was happening at Coldwater Peak? What haunted these slopes? He wanted to understand, even if understanding might destroy him. In late February, Marcus was assigned to accompany Helen on an inspection of the upper slopes. Avalanche conditions had been a concern, and they needed to check the stability of several key areas. They took a snowmobile up the mountain, following the service roads that ran alongside the ski runs. It was a clear, cold day, and the view from the upper elevations was breathtaking. Marcus could see for miles, other peaks rising in every direction, endless wilderness stretching to the horizon. As they worked their way across a high traverse, Helen stopped the snowmobile and turned to look at him. "You have lasted longer than I expected," she said. "Most people are gone by now. What keeps you here?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "I need to understand. What is this place? What is happening here?" Helen was quiet for a long time, staring out at the mountains. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "This mountain is old. Older than the resort, older than the town of Pinewood, older than white settlement in this region. The native peoples who lived here considered this area sacred, but also dangerous. They had their own rules about when to come here and what to avoid." She paused. When the resort was first built, back in the 70s, the developers ignored all the local warnings. They thought it was just superstition. What happened? Bad things, accidents, disappearances, deaths that could not be explained. The resort nearly closed several times. But there is too much money invested here, too many people whose livelihoods depend on this place. So instead of closing, they developed the rules. Through trial and error, through loss and suffering, they figured out how to coexist with whatever is here. If you follow the rules, you are relatively safe. If you do not, the mountain takes you. But what is it? Marcus pressed. What is actually here? Helen turned to look at him, and her eyes were ancient and sad. "Honestly, I do not know. Maybe it is spirits. Maybe it is something else. Something that does not have a name in our language. All I know is that it is real. It is dangerous. And it has been here far longer than we have." She started the snowmobile again. "Come on, we have more ground to cover." They completed their inspection without incident, but the conversation stayed with Marcus. Helen's words had confirmed what he had already suspected. This was not a prank or a hazing ritual. There was something genuinely wrong with Coldwater Peak, something old and malevolent that the rules helped keep at bay. But the rules were not perfect. Sarah had followed the rules, and she had still vanished, which meant that even perfect obedience was not a guarantee of safety. March brought warmer weather and the beginning of spring skiing season. The snow began to melt at the lower elevations, though the upper slopes remained well covered. The days grew longer, which was a relief. Darkness was when the danger escalated, and having more daylight hours meant more time to work and move around without fear. But it also meant that the season was winding down. In another month, maybe 6 weeks, the resort would close for the summer. Marcus would have to decide whether to leave or to stay on as part of the tiny summer maintenance crew. One evening in mid-March, Marcus was doing a routine check of the ski patrol station when he found a notebook hidden in one of the desks. It was old, The pages yellowed and brittle, and it appeared to be some kind of journal. The entries were dated from more than 20 years ago and were written by someone named Michael Grant. Marcus began to read, and what he found made his blood run cold. Michael had been a maintenance worker at Coldwater Peak, just like Marcus. His journal documented his experiences with the strange occurrences at the resort. But more than that, it contained Michael's attempts to research and understand what was happening. He had interviewed locals, consulted historical records, and even hired a private investigator to dig into the resort's past. What he uncovered was a history of tragedy. Before the resort was built, there had been a logging camp on the site. In the winter of 1952, the entire camp had vanished. Nearly 40 men had simply disappeared overnight, leaving behind their equipment, their supplies, and no trace of where they had gone. Before the logging camp, there had been a mining operation in the 1880s. That too had ended in disaster, with multiple deaths and disappearances attributed to cave-ins and avalanches, though the survivors told stories of something else, something that hunted them in the tunnels. And before that, going back centuries, the indigenous peoples of the region had told stories of a guardian spirit that protected the mountain and punished those who showed it disrespect. Michael's final entries were increasingly frantic. He wrote about seeing figures moving on the slopes at night, about hearing voices calling his name from the forest, about finding symbols carved into trees near the resort boundary. His last entry was dated April 3rd, and it simply said, "I know what it wants. I know what it is. I am going to try to communicate with it tonight. If I do not return, tell my family I love them." There were no more entries after that. Marcus carefully replaced the notebook and went to find Tom. He showed the older man what he had found and asked if he knew anything about Michael Grant. Tom's face grew grim. "Yeah, I knew Mike. He was a good guy, smart, curious. He disappeared about 20 years ago. They found his body 3 days later at the base of the South Face Cliffs. Official ruling was that he slipped and fell, but none of us believed it. Mike was an experienced mountaineer. He would not have made that kind of mistake." "Did he ever tell you what he was researching?" "He mentioned it once or twice. Said he was trying to find the source of all the weirdness. I told him to leave it alone, that some things were better left unknown." Tom shook his head. "I should have tried harder to stop him. Maybe he would still be alive." Marcus thought about the notebook, about Michael's final entry. What did you think he meant? That he knew what it was. Tom met his eyes. "I think Mike figured out something important, something that got him killed. And I think whatever he learned is something we are not meant to know. This place has rules for a reason, Marcus. One of those unwritten rules is do not dig too deep. Do not try to understand. Just survive and move on." But Marcus could not let it go. Michael's notebook had awakened something in him, a need to understand that was stronger than his fear. He began his own research, spending his off hours in the resort's small library, searching through old records and local history books. He drove down to Pinewood on his days off and talked to the elderly residents, asking carefully oblique questions about the mountain and its history. Slowly, pieces began to come together. The mountain had many names over the centuries. The indigenous peoples called it something that roughly translated to the place where spirits hunt. Early settlers called it Widowmaker Mountain, after the number of men who died trying to tame it. By the time the resort was built, those old names had been forgotten, replaced by the bland and marketable Coldwater Peak. But changing the name had not changed the essential nature of the place. There were patterns in the disappearances and deaths. They clustered around certain dates, particularly the equinoxes and solstices. They were more common during periods of extreme weather, storms, and cold snaps, and they almost always involved people who had broken one of the rules, whether knowingly or not. The rules themselves had evolved over time. The earliest versions Marcus could find from the resort's first decade of operation were shorter and more vague. As more incidents occurred, the rules became more specific, each one apparently written in response to some tragedy. Marcus began to notice something else. The veteran staff, the people like Tom who had been at Coldwater Peak for many years, all shared certain characteristics. They were cautious, observant, and deeply respectful of the mountain. But more than that, there was something in their eyes, a kind of weary acceptance that Marcus was only beginning to understand. They had made a choice to stay in this dangerous place, and that choice had changed them. They were survivors, but survival had come at a cost. As April arrived and the season drew to a close, Helen approached Marcus with an offer. "We need summer maintenance staff. It is a small crew, just 4 or 5 people keeping the place maintained during the off-season. The pay is good, and you would have a lot of independence." She paused. "I think you have what it takes to last here, Marcus. You follow the rules, you stay alert, and you do not panic. Those are rare qualities." Marcus thought about it for several days. Part of him wanted to leave, to return to the normal world where the worst dangers were traffic and office politics. But another part of him, a part that was growing stronger, felt drawn to stay. He had unfinished business here. He wanted to solve the mystery of Coldwater Peak, to understand what Michael Grant had discovered, to perhaps find a way to end the haunting once and for all. It was foolish, he knew, probably suicidal, but he could not walk away. He told Helen he would stay for the summer. She nodded as if she had expected this. "Good. Just remember, the rules still apply during off-season. Actually, they are even more important then. There are fewer people around, which means if something goes wrong, help might be far away." She handed him an updated rules sheet. There were several new entries he had not seen before, specific to summer operations. He read them carefully and committed them to memory. The resort closed to the public on the 3rd Sunday in April. Over the next week, most of the staff left, heading back to their regular lives until the next season. By the end of the month, only 6 people remained at Coldwater Peak. Helen, who lived on site year-round. Tom, who had nowhere else to go. Marcus and 3 others, 2 maintenance workers named Carlos and Jennifer, and a year-round groundskeeper named Ed. It was a small, tight-knit group, and the atmosphere changed dramatically once the guests were gone. Without the crowds and the noise and the constant activity, the wrongness of the place became more apparent. During the busy season, it had been possible to ignore the strangeness, to write it off as imagination or coincidence. But in the quiet off-season, there was no hiding from it. The resort felt empty in a way that went beyond mere absence of people. It felt hollow, like a shell waiting to be filled with something terrible. The incidents increased in frequency. Doors that were locked at night would be found standing open in the morning. Equipment would go missing, only to reappear days later in impossible locations. Strange sounds echoed through the empty buildings at night, footsteps and whispers, and sometimes what sounded like singing in a language no one recognized. Everyone saw things moving in their peripheral vision, shapes that vanished when looked at directly. In early May, Jennifer disappeared. She had been working alone in the main lodge, cleaning and doing minor repairs. When she did not show up for dinner, the others went looking for her. They found her tools laid out neatly on a table, her radio sitting next to them, still on. But Jennifer herself was gone. A search of the entire resort turned up nothing. No trace, no sign of struggle, no clue to what had happened. She had simply vanished, just like Sarah before her. Helen reported it to the sheriff, but there was little that could be done. The sheriff searched the area, found nothing, and eventually classified Jennifer as a missing person. Helen hired a replacement, but the new guy lasted exactly 3 days before fleeing in the middle of the night, leaving behind all his possessions and a note that simply said, "I cannot stay here." Helen did not try to hire anyone else after that. Marcus threw himself into his research with renewed urgency. Jennifer's disappearance had shaken him badly. These were not just stories or historical accounts anymore. People he knew, people he had worked beside and shared meals with, were being taken. And he still had no idea why or how to stop it. He spent hours reading through Michael Grant's notebook, trying to decode the man's increasingly cryptic final entries. He explored every part of the resort that was not explicitly forbidden, looking for clues. In late May, he made a discovery. While exploring the basement of the main lodge, an area used mostly for storage, he found an old locked door that he had not noticed before. The lock was rusted, and he was able to force it open with a crowbar. Behind the door was a narrow staircase leading deeper underground. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and descended carefully. The stairs ended in a small room, barely 10 feet square, carved directly out of the rock of the mountain. The walls were covered in symbols, some carved, some painted. They looked old, very old, and Marcus recognized some of them from Michael's notebook. In the center of the room was a stone altar of sorts, a flat rock about waist high. On the altar was a collection of objects, bones, mostly small animal bones, but at least one that looked disturbingly human. Bundles of dried plants, coins of various ages and denominations, and a small leather-bound book. Marcus picked up the book with trembling hands. It was handwritten in multiple languages, some of which he recognized, and some he did not, but one section near the back was in English. It appeared to be a set of instructions, a ritual of some kind. The purpose, as far as Marcus could understand, was to appease the guardian of the mountain, to offer tribute in exchange for safe passage. The ritual required specific items offered at specific times, following a precise sequence of actions. This was it. This was what Michael had found. Not an explanation of what haunted Coldwater Peak, but a method of negotiating with it. Marcus carefully copied the instructions into his own notebook, photographed the symbols on the walls, and returned upstairs. He needed to think about what to do with this information. That night, Marcus could not sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, turning over the possibilities in his mind. If the ritual worked, it might provide real protection, something more reliable than the rules. But it might also make things worse. What if he performed it incorrectly? What if the entity, whatever it was, took offense? Michael had tried to communicate with it and had ended up dead. Was Marcus about to make the same fatal mistake? He decided to talk to Tom. The older man had more experience with this place than anyone except Helen, and Marcus trusted his judgment. He found Tom the next morning in the equipment shed, organizing tools. Marcus described what he had found in the basement room and showed Tom his copied notes about the ritual. Tom listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each word. When Marcus finished, Tom was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You should not have gone down there. That room is forbidden for a reason." "It is not on the rules list," Marcus protested. "Some rules are not written down," Tom replied. "They are just understood. That room is old, Marcus, older than the resort, maybe older than anything else on this mountain. It is a sacred place, and we are not supposed to disturb it. But what if this ritual could help us? What if it could stop the disappearances?" Tom shook his head. "Or what if it makes everything worse?" Michael thought he could control this thing, negotiate with it. Look what happened to him. You are playing with forces you do not understand, Marcus. Please, let this go. But Marcus could not let it go. The knowledge burned inside him, demanding action. He spent the next week preparing, gathering the materials required for the ritual. Some were easy to obtain. Others required trips to Pinewood and beyond, searching for specific items in specialty stores and online. All the while, he kept his activities secret from the others, knowing they would try to stop him. The ritual was supposed to be performed at midnight on the summer solstice, which was 3 weeks away. Marcus marked the date on his calendar and waited, his anxiety building with each passing day. Strange incidents continued around the resort. Ed, the groundskeeper, reported seeing figures in the tree line at dusk. Carlos woke one night to find his room filled with a thick, choking mist that dissipated as soon as he opened the windows. Helen grew more withdrawn and tense, spending long hours in her office with the door locked. 3 days before the solstice, Tom came to Marcus's room late at night. His face was grave. "I know what you are planning," he said without preamble, "and I am begging you not to do it. This is a mistake, Marcus. A terrible mistake. How did you know? I have been here a long time. I recognize the signs when someone is preparing to do something stupid." Tom sat down heavily on the edge of Marcus's bed. "Listen to me. I have seen people try to fight this thing, try to control it, try to banish it. None of them succeeded. Most of them died. The ones who survived were broken. The only way to survive Coldwater Peak is to accept it for what it is, follow the rules, and do not try to change anything." "I cannot just accept it," Marcus said. "People are disappearing, Tom. Good people. If there is any chance this ritual can stop it, I have to try. And if it does not stop it, if it makes you the next one to disappear, then at least I tried. At least I did something instead of just cowering and following rules I do not understand." Tom stood up slowly. "I cannot stop you, but I want you to know that you are making a choice that will affect all of us. If something goes wrong, it is not just you who will pay the price." He walked to the door, then turned back. "I will miss you, Marcus. You were a good kid." After Tom left, Marcus sat alone in the darkness, doubt gnawing at him. Was he making a terrible mistake? Was his pride and curiosity leading him to destruction? But he thought about Sarah, about Jennifer, about all the others who had been taken by this mountain over the decades. Someone had to try to end this. It might as well be him. The summer solstice arrived with clear skies and warm temperatures. Marcus went through his regular work routine, trying to act normal despite the tension coiling in his gut. At dinner, he barely ate, and Helen gave him a long, searching look, but said nothing. After dark, he went to his room and gathered the materials he had prepared. Everything was ready. At 11:30, he made his way to the basement room. The door was still unlocked, and the staircase descended into darkness. Marcus descended carefully, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The room was exactly as he had left it. The symbols on the walls, the altar in the center. He arranged his materials according to the instructions he had copied. Specific herbs in one pile, a silver coin, a small knife, a bowl for mixing, and a written statement of intent, which he had painstakingly composed over the past week. At exactly midnight, he began the ritual. He followed the instructions precisely, lighting the herbs, adding the ingredients to the bowl in the correct order, speaking the words that were written in the leather-bound book. The language felt strange in his mouth, ancient and powerful. As he worked, the air in the room seemed to thicken, to take on weight and presence. The temperature dropped. His breath misted. The symbols on the walls began to glow with a faint phosphorescent light. Marcus continued, his voice steady despite his fear. He was committed now. There was no turning back. He cut his palm with the knife, let 3 drops of blood fall into the bowl, and spoke the final words of the ritual. Then he waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room was silent, except for the sound of Marcus's own breathing. Then the temperature plummeted even further. Frost formed on the walls in intricate patterns. The light from the symbols grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm with something that might have been a heartbeat, and Marcus felt a presence, vast and ancient and utterly alien, turn its attention toward him. It was not malevolent, exactly. It was beyond such simple categories. It simply was a fundamental force of the mountain, neither good nor evil, but wholly other. Marcus understood in that moment what Michael Grant must have felt in his final moments. The sheer otherness of the entity was overwhelming, crushing, impossible to fully comprehend with a human mind. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer the tribute and request protection, but no sound came out. His voice had frozen in his throat. The presence moved closer. Marcus could not see it, but he could feel it, a weight in the air, a pressure against his skin. Images flooded his mind, the mountain as it had been thousands of years ago, pristine and untouched. The first humans to set foot here, treating it with reverence and fear. The passage of centuries, the slow encroachment of civilization, the violence done to the mountain, the drilling and blasting and building, the casual disrespect of people who saw it as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. He understood. The entity was not evil. It was a guardian, a protector of this place, and it responded to threat and disrespect with violence, because that was its nature, its purpose. The rules had been developed not as a way to control it, but as a way to show respect, to acknowledge its primacy. When people followed the rules, they were demonstrating that they understood this was not their domain, that they were guests here, tolerated but not welcome. When people broke the rules, they were claiming ownership, asserting dominance, and the guardian responded by removing them. The presence withdrew slightly, and Marcus found he could breathe again. In his mind, he heard not words exactly, but a communication, a message transmitted directly into his consciousness. The tribute was accepted. The ritual had worked, but there was a price. There was always a price. Marcus would be granted protection, but he would also be bound to the mountain. He could not leave now. He was part of this place, as surely as the stones and the snow and the ancient guardian itself. If he tried to leave, the protection would be revoked, and the mountain would take him. Marcus wanted to scream, to protest, take it back. But he knew it was too late. The bargain was sealed. He had sought understanding and protection, and he had received both. But freedom was the cost. He gathered his materials with numb hands and climbed back upstairs. The lodge was dark and quiet. He returned to his room, lay down on his bed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. In the morning, Tom took one look at him and knew. You did it. You performed the ritual. Marcus nodded. I did. And you are still here. That is something, I suppose. Tom sat down across from him. What did you learn? Everything. Nothing. It is a guardian. It is protecting the mountain. We are the invaders, the disrespect. The rules are not about control. They are about submission, about acknowledging that this is not our place. Marcus laughed, a bitter, broken sound. And I cannot leave. I am bound here now. Part of the price. Tom's expression was sad, but not surprised. I wish you had listened to me. But I understand why you did it. You wanted answers. You wanted to fix things. He reached over and gripped Marcus's shoulder. For what it is worth, I am glad you are still alive. Many who try what you tried do not survive. The summer passed. Marcus continued his work, maintaining the empty resort, preparing for the next season. But he moved through the days like a ghost, disconnected from everything. He knew that Tom and Helen understood what had happened, though they did not speak of it directly. The others, Carlos and Ed, noticed the change in him, but did not ask questions. That was the way of Coldwater Peak. You did not pry into other people's darkness. No one else disappeared that summer. Marcus did not know if that was because of the ritual, because of the protection he had been granted, or simply because of luck. He did not really care anymore. He had his answers. He understood the mountain and its guardian. But understanding had brought him no peace, no satisfaction, only resignation. When the resort opened again in November, new staff arrived. Marcus saw the same confusion and fear in their faces that he had felt a year ago. He saw them receive the rules from Helen, saw them struggle to believe, saw them slowly come to understand that this place was fundamentally wrong. He wanted to warn them, to tell them to leave while they still could. But he said nothing. Everyone had to make their own choices. One night in late November, Marcus stood outside the staff quarters, looking up at the slopes. The lifts were still, the runs empty, the mountains silent under a sky full of stars. He thought about his old life in Denver, his apartment, his failed relationship, his meaningless job. That life seemed impossibly distant now, like something from a dream. This was his reality now. This mountain, this haunted place, this eternal vigilance against forces beyond comprehension. He thought about Michael Grant, about Sarah, about Jennifer, about all the others who had been taken. He wondered if they had found peace wherever they were, or if they were still here somehow, bound to the mountain in ways even worse than his own binding. He wondered if he would eventually join them, if his protection would fail, or if he would make some fatal mistake. He wondered if it even mattered. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Somewhere in the distance, Marcus heard the sound of the old double chairlift starting up, its motors groaning as the chairs began to move. He checked his watch. 9:45 p.m. Right on schedule. He turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind him, pulling the curtains closed, following the rules because that was what you did here. That was how you survived, for whatever survival was worth. And deep beneath the resort, in the hidden room carved from mountain stone, the symbols on the walls glowed faintly in the darkness, and something vast and patient and utterly inhuman continued its eternal watch over the slopes of Coldwater Peak, waiting for the next person who would break the rules, the next offering, the next addition to its endless collection of those who had failed to show the proper respect. The mountain was patient. The mountain was eternal. And the mountain always collected what it was owed.